I used to count my life in views. Now, I count it in breaths. They told me the body forgets pain if you give it time. The body is generous, I've learned. Memory isn't. I'm sitting across from a microphone in a quiet room, somewhere that smells like coffee and carpet cleaner, and they want me to start at the beginning. I don't have a good beginning anymore. I have an after. My name is Tyler Jameson. I was a study abroad kid who thought danger was an algorithm, and this is what I did to myself and to people who didn't owe me anything. Say your name, the producer whispers, as if I might lose it. Tyler, I say. Tyler Jameson. I don't talk about Pyongyang at first. I talk about the hunger that got me there, how I watched other people go viral for less, how the map on my wall had pins stuck in cities I thought would make me interesting, how everyone said North Korea was impossible, which only sounded like a dare. I studied international relations that semester, but really, I studied attention. I learned the grammar of outrage, the cropping of faces, the way a title can make a stranger feel like a villain or a punchline. I learned the currency of clicks. Then I chased it. The word I used for it was curiosity. The word my mother used was pride. Both were correct, but only one required apology. I remember the winter air there, thin and metallic, how it whistled in concrete courtyards. I remember the silence, how whole neighborhoods felt padded, watched, choreographed. I remember also that I loved it, because loving it made me brave, and brave made me loud. I filmed what wasn't meant to be filmed. I bribed for shots I didn't understand. I used people's caution as a backdrop for my cleverness. The thrill ran ahead of the ethics, and I ran after it, laughing, out of breath, so sure the world was my cameraman.
In one clip I kept, there's a woman in a gray coat pushing a cart with 2 plastic buckets stacked like a wedding cake. She looks at me, a quick flicker, then looks away. That flicker is in my head every night now. A human calculation. Will this cost me? Will this cost my sister? Will this cost the man who let him stand here? My video called it a candid moment. My caption joked about a day in the socialist life. I threw that moment into a feed where strangers could scroll past it with cold pizza in their lap. I did that. I did that with her face. The day of the selfie is easy to narrate because we're trained to narrate our triumphs. We practice the posture. Head tilted. Grin. Behind me, a monument that meant something heavy to the people around me and something light to the brand I was building. Dictator chic, I typed, thumbs moving like I was diffusing a bomb when I was actually lighting one. I remember the little haptic buzz in my palm as the post went up. I remember a second buzz, a third, notifications blooming like fireworks. I don't remember the weather. I remember my pulse. After that, everything becomes staccato. The phone gone in the morning. My name missing from a list that had always included me. A van door sliding with the practiced mercy of a guillotine. The room I was taken to smelled like floor polish and winter coats. The men wore expressions like locked drawers. There are phrases I can still hear as if they were printed on glass, held to the light. Disrespect. Hostile act. Against the dignity. I remember trying to find the right performance. Awkward tourist. Earnest student, apologetic son, none of them fit. Pride is a costume that doesn't come off when you're sweating. It sticks, and it stings. I want to tell you what I said under the first set of questions. I want to pick a version that makes me sound principled. That would be another caption, wouldn't it? The truth is ugly. I negotiated with shame. I pleaded. I blamed ignorance that was actually arrogance. I said I didn't know the rules while knowing I'd broken them because rule breaking played better. At some point I realized I wasn't the only one in the room who could pay for this. Years later, I can describe the weight of labor by the kilo. The way frost turns rope into iron. The geometry of a bunk bed that is too short for a contrite spine. But the confession belongs in the present. It belongs here, with my voice and its pauses, with the part where I say the quiet thing out loud. I didn't respect the country I walked into. I didn't respect the people whose lives I turned into proof. I wanted fame. I called it freedom. There's a beat of silence in the studio. The red light on the recorder keeps its insect stare. I think about the man who drove the van. He never looked back at me. I think about the interpreter who wouldn't meet my eyes. I think about a guard who adjusted my wrist ropes once very slightly so the knot pinched less. None of them will hear this. None of them owe me their hearing. But this part is mine to say, even if it lands in an empty room. I don't know if I can ask for forgiveness, I say into the microphone. I know I can describe a boundary I crossed and what it cost. A sip of water, the faint shiver of glass on wood. I'm supposed to stop at the beginning, but there isn't a beginning that isn't already breaking. So I end with the thing I wish I had understood before any of it. When you point a camera at pain, you owe the pain a name, and a place at the table, and a life beyond your caption. If you can't give it that, you should put the camera down. I didn't. And then they put me down instead.
When I first saw Pyongyang, it looked like a movie set that had forgotten the audience. Wide boulevards, spotless concrete, pastel buildings arranged like polite sentences. Everything was clean, too clean. Even the air felt rehearsed. And I loved it. That's the part I still choke on. How beautiful it all seemed when I was too naive to feel the fear beneath it. I came to North Korea through a student exchange program most people assumed was propaganda. Maybe it was, but to me, it was content waiting to happen. I'd been filming since high school. Street food stalls in Bangkok, the ruins of Chernobyl, slums in Manila, always with the same wide-eyed commentary about hidden worlds. What I didn't say was that I liked how those worlds made me look. Brave, different, unfiltered. Pyongyang was supposed to be my masterpiece, my exclusive access to a forbidden stage, a semester that would crown me the kid who went where no influencer dared. The first week was pure choreography. Guides shadowed us everywhere. Men in perfect suits with smiles that didn't bend past protocol. They showed us model farms where no one worked, shops where no one shopped, subway murals of eternal happiness. Other students whispered complaints. No Wi-Fi, no nightlife, no escape. I whispered opportunity. I filmed the cracks. Soldiers smoking in alleyways, a boy cleaning snow off a statue's base, a woman crying quietly behind a ration line. Every frame was an act of theft, and every click of the shutter a heartbeat of pride. It wasn't about truth. It was about being the one who showed it. At night, we gathered in the dorm's common room, pretending to study, passing around flash drives filled with Western music like they were contraband relics. That's where I met Mi-sun, the interpreter. Her English was flawless, too flawless. She'd studied abroad once, in Beijing. Her smile held the exhaustion of someone who'd seen both worlds and belonged to neither. "You like our country?" she asked one evening. "I like how strange it feels," I said, watching her translate my arrogance into a softer word. She laughed quietly. "Strange is safe. Beautiful is dangerous here." That should have been enough of a warning. But I wasn't listening for warnings. I was listening for sound bites.
The temptation wasn't wealth. It wasn't even fame.
Not yet. It was attention. Each forbidden clip I uploaded to my hidden server felt like oxygen. I watched my analytics grow like vines, twisting up my ego, strangling any second thought. My friends back home called me the kid with a death wish. I called it journalism. Mi-sun saw through me. One night she asked, "Why do you need people to see everything?" "Because if no one sees it, it's like it never happened." She looked at me for a long time, the kind of silence that feels like judgment wrapped in pity. Then she said, "Here, that's exactly how we survive, by pretending it didn't happen." Her words didn't humble me, they intrigued me. The more she warned, the more I wanted to test the line. Fame is like fire. You only feel alive when you're standing too close. There was a rooftop where the students weren't supposed to go. I found the door unlocked one night, climbed the steps, and looked out at the sleeping city. No lights past curfew, just the faint pulse of red beacons on watchtowers. The silence was vast, like a secret. That's where I took my first real risk. I set up my camera, hit record, and began talking. About propaganda, about freedom, about how no system can silence the lens. I spoke like a preacher, drunk on the echo of my own voice. The irony didn't hit me until years later. I was celebrating freedom in a country where silence was survival, and I wasn't the one who'd pay for that speech. Weeks passed. Mi-sun started avoiding me. She didn't smile anymore when translating my questions to the guides. Then one night, she left a note under my door. "They're watching the videos. Delete everything I didn't." Instead, I filmed the note. I told myself I was documenting courage, that truth needed witnesses. But really, I just wanted to see if I could get away with it. Every act of defiance fed the addiction. Likes became validation, and validation became breath. When I look back now, I realized the tragedy wasn't the arrest. It was how proud I felt the night before it happened, scrolling through comments that called me fearless, legendary, a real journalist. I thought I was standing above the system. I was already inside it. I mistook curiosity for courage, and courage for freedom. But what I really wanted was applause. Pride doesn't whisper, it performs. The fame came faster than fear. One morning I woke to messages stacked like confessions, screenshots of my face, comments in languages I couldn't read, an email from a producer in LA asking if I'd consider a visual docu-journalism collaboration. He said my raw access was brave, historic. He didn't know that bravery feels a lot like arrogance when you're 23 and sleepless. Every new follower was an applause I could hold, every risk a stage light. And soon, I wasn't studying abroad anymore. I was performing abroad. I bribed a guard for access to a restricted street, 3 American cigarettes for a few minutes of footage. He hesitated, looked over his shoulder, then waved me through. For the first time, I felt powerful. Powerful enough to think morality was just another rule for people too timid to break them. I filmed the broken statues, the crumbling apartments, the men standing in ration lines pretending not to see me. I made oppression aesthetic, a mood board of someone else's misery. Every shot was drenched in irony, and every upload was another nail in the coffin of empathy. Nights blurred into something else. Not bars, there were no bars, but there were rooms, private rooms, where foreign students and local interpreters drank contraband soju from water bottles labeled tea. I called it cultural exchange. It was indulgence, plain and simple. Mi-sun was there once. She drank quietly, eyes on the floor. When I laughed too loudly, she touched my wrist and whispered, "Stop making noise you can't afford." I told her she was too cautious. She told me I was too loud to survive. She was right. But by then, I'd stopped listening to anything softer than applause. The videos grew darker. I started narrating like a prophet. This is what dictatorship looks like. This is what freedom costs. All while sipping smuggled whiskey, editing misery into cinematic truth. I told myself I was witnessing history, but it wasn't history I was chasing. It was recognition. The algorithm became my god, and I was faithful in the only way I knew how. Sacrifice after sacrifice, each one human, each one unseen. I remember one night, the air frozen, the sky bruised with smoke from the factories. A man on the corner was selling handmade pins of the leader's face. Tourists weren't supposed to touch them. I bought 3. I pinned one to my jacket, smiling into my camera like it was a joke. A rebel, a satirist, a fool. That image went viral. The caption? Dictator chic. It was supposed to be ironic, but irony dies where reverence is law. The next morning, the city felt different, quieter, too quiet. My phone didn't turn on. The Wi-Fi was under maintenance. The smiles from the guards had vanished. Still, I went out, because pride doesn't retreat. It doubles down. I filmed again, laughing too loudly in a market where no one else dared to laugh. I didn't see the man following me, didn't hear the second pair of boots on the snow. I remember a gloved hand closing on my shoulder, a voice, not angry, not loud, just final. You mock what keeps us alive. I turned. The camera kept recording until it hit the ground. They took me to a gray room, sat me under a single bulb, and played my videos back to me, one by one. Each laugh became a weapon, each word an indictment, each frame a mirror I couldn't look into. They didn't need to shout. They let my own footage do the torturing. I thought pleasure meant freedom. It only meant silence. Desire makes every sin sound like a choice. And in that silence, between the clicks of the playback, between my heartbeat and their stillness, I finally understood the cost of being seen. But it was too late. The performance had already ended. The audience had already moved on. All that remained was the echo. The same room, the same chair, the same questions. Time lost its edges. Days bled into one another until I could only tell them apart by the weight of hunger. I learned that silence could bruise, and that light, constant, white, merciless, could make a man forget his own outline. They called it education. I called it erasure. The first week I rehearsed explanations, cultural misunderstanding, artistic intent, youthful mistake. They listened like priests to a confession that would never grant absolution. One of them, the interpreter I'd once mocked for his stiffness, looked at me across the table and said quietly, "You wanted to show the world our cage. Now you live inside it." I tried to answer, but the words stuck like gravel in my throat. I realized then how small my vocabulary was without irony to hide behind. The work camp was 50 kilometers north of the city, past fields of snow that swallowed sound. The guards called it reformation through labor. We called it the cold that thought. We woke before sunrise. We carried rocks until our hands stopped feeling like hands. The meals were ladles of gray, rice, cabbage, and something that used to be meat. I watched men disappear. Not with violence, but with exhaustion. They just folded into the ground one morning and didn't get up again. No one said their names. Names were for the living. At night, I'd lie on the wooden bunk, the smell of damp straw in my hair, and hear the breathing of 50 strangers who had all stopped dreaming. I wondered which one of them I had filmed once and called a faceless worker. There were no mirrors in the barracks, but I could see my reflection in the tin bowl of soup, a thinner face, eyes sunken, mouth quiet. I didn't hate him. I didn't know him. I used to narrate everything. Now the only voice I heard was the wind slipping through the cracks in the roof, a sound that didn't need translation. Months passed, maybe a year. The guards began to ignore me. That was the closest thing to mercy. One night, I was ordered to translate for a new prisoner, a woman accused of selling state bread. When she saw me, she whispered, "You're the foreign boy from the photos." Her voice shook. "People disappeared because of you." The words hit harder than any blow. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I hadn't meant harm, that I was just stupid. But stupidity doesn't resurrect anyone. It only echoes. After that night, I stopped asking for release. I started asking for silence. The same bar, the same face, the same lie. It replayed in my mind like an old video on loop. I smiled slower now. The laughter came late. Money ran out, but shame stayed rich. When the guards changed shifts, no one even looked up. The world had moved on. The algorithm that once worshipped me had forgotten my name. The followers, the likes, the "you're so brave" comments. Gone. The internet had eaten its hero, and I was still here, chewing on cold rice, wondering if the woman with the buckets ever forgave the boy who stole her face. When I finally broke, truly broke, it wasn't from pain. It was from a photograph. They showed me the selfie, that stupid grinning face beside the monument. Frozen pride. Frozen ignorance. The interrogator asked, "Why did you smile?" I said, "Because I didn't know what else to do." He nodded once. "Now you know." I began to work slower, not out of rebellion, but because speed had become meaningless. In the silence of labor, I started to listen. To the scrape of shovel on stone, to the coughing man beside me, to the distant hum of trucks carrying food I'd never taste. It was all sound, and in sound there was truth. I kept paying for the night, until the night asked for me. The lights went off, but not inside him. I thought captivity would kill me. Instead, it made me transparent, a shell so thin that even memory could pass through. And somewhere between the echoes of commands and the ache of frostbite, I stopped being the man who filmed everything. I became the man who watched, and finally understood what it meant to see. The cell smelled of sweat and iron, but beneath it, faint, impossible, I smelled rice, steaming, soft, sweet in memory. It shouldn't have been there. There was no rice in that place. But the mind is cruel in its mercy. It feeds you ghosts when your stomach is empty. I closed my eyes and saw my mother at the stove, her hair tied back, humming the same half-song she used to sing when I came home late. "Eat while it's hot, Tyler, or it'll turn cold like your heart." She'd say it with a smile, but now the words echoed like scripture. For months I hadn't spoken her name. Names felt dangerous. They reminded you of people who still had warmth. But in that moment, I whispered it into the dark, just to prove I still could. The days became gentler, not easier, but slower. The guards no longer shouted. Maybe I'd become invisible enough to be harmless. Maybe pity was their way of finishing me. Work continued as always. We shoveled, lifted, carried. But the rhythm had changed. I didn't rush anymore. Every motion became a kind of prayer. To the men who didn't return. To the faces I had stolen. To the laughter that used to mean freedom. Once, during a lunch break, I saw a guard sitting alone, eating from a small tin bowl. He looked young, younger than me. He caught my stare, and for a heartbeat, he didn't look like a guard. He looked like someone's son. He held my gaze, then pushed the bowl toward me, half his portion of rice. He said nothing. Neither did I, because language was too clumsy for what passed between us. Shame meeting mercy. That night, I dreamed of home again, but not of the kitchen, not of my mother's voice. I dreamed of the woman in the gray coat, the one from my video, pushing her cart through the snow. She turned to look at me, and this time I didn't hold the camera. I just stood there, hands empty, and nodded. She nodded back. Then she vanished, like film burned too long under light. Weeks later, a new prisoner arrived. A teacher, I think. He had been caught with foreign literature. During the long shifts, he would whisper poetry under his breath, and somehow I began to remember the rhythm of words again. Not captions, not commentary, just words that carried weight instead of meaning. He told me, freedom isn't the absence of walls, it's the presence of truth. And I wrote that line in my head over and over, like a psalm scratched on the inside of my skull. There's something sacred about silence when you stop fighting it. It becomes a teacher. Every sound, the shuffle of feet, the sigh of snow, the creak of rope, became a syllable in a language I'd never learned. The language of consequence, the grammar of remorse. I realized I had spent years talking about people. Now, I was learning to talk to them. Without words, without agenda, only presence. Months passed. Then, one morning the gate opened. A name was read. Mine. They said my government had negotiated my release. I didn't move. I didn't believe it. Freedom had become a superstition, something other people worshipped. When I finally stepped outside the camp, the air hit like salt on a wound. It was winter again. Snow everywhere. Endless, white, forgiving. Mi-sun was there. Thinner, quieter, her eyes tired but steady. She said only one thing. You're still alive. Use it differently this time. Then she turned away before I could answer. That night, I sat in a holding room waiting for my escort home. There was no window, but I imagined one. And beyond it, I pictured that same gray-coated woman pushing her cart, the one I had used to chase clicks. Only now, I saw her not as a subject, but as a survivor. For the first time, I whispered a prayer, not for myself, but for her. The memory of home is the loudest sermon. I slept with my back against the wall, my palms open, and dreamed of nothing. It was the most peaceful dream I'd ever had. When the plane lifted off the runway, I didn't feel relief. I felt weight, invisible, patient, waiting for me to name it. Reporters were already spinning the headlines before I landed. American student freed after years in North Korea. Survivor returns home. But the word survivor didn't fit. It felt like a borrowed coat, too big, in all the wrong places. Because what I survived wasn't just a prison. It was myself. Home looked smaller. The streets I used to film now felt staged. Everyone moving too fast, laughing too loud, living too easily. My friends threw a welcome back party I couldn't attend. I sat in my apartment instead, surrounded by the glow of screens I couldn't touch. The phone on my desk was the same model I'd carried in Pyongyang. It buzzed with messages. You're a legend. Tell us the real story. Let's monetize this. I turned it face down. The vibration sounded like ghosts applauding. For months, I couldn't look at a camera. Every lens felt like a loaded weapon. I started walking at dawn instead. No phone, no headphones, no audience. Just breath. Just the sound of shoes scraping concrete. Sometimes I'd pass a bar where music leaked through the doors, the same kind of bass that once made me feel alive. Now, it just made me quiet. I still walk past them. The music calls, softer now. I don't answer. Not out of fear, but out of understanding. When people ask what I learned, I tell them this. The internet forgives quickly, but the soul does not. Fame feeds on noise. Wisdom grows in silence. And sometimes the only way to respect a story is not to tell it, but to carry it. I visit schools now. I talk to students about storytelling, about ethics, about what happens when curiosity becomes hunger. I tell them how a camera can wound, how an image can outlive empathy. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they laugh. That's fine. I used to laugh too. One afternoon, after a talk, a girl waited until everyone else left. She said, "You sound like you're still there." I told her, "Maybe I am." Then she asked, "If you could go back, would you still take the photo?" I wanted to say no, but honesty is a kind of repentance. So I said, "I don't know. I think I'd still want to see. I'd just learn how to see without stealing." She nodded slowly, and for a moment I felt forgiven. Not by her, by myself. I keep a single photograph on my desk now. Not the selfie, that's gone. This one's different. A faded picture of a street in winter. A woman in a gray coat pushing a cart. Her face turned away, the snow blurring everything into softness. No caption, no credits, just stillness. Sometimes, late at night, I record voice notes, not for anyone, just for the air. Fragments of thought, apologies without address. Once I said out loud, "Peace begins where pleasure once ended." And for the first time, the silence after the words didn't hurt. It healed. I still dream of Pyongyang sometimes. The wide streets, the cold light, the hush of discipline that used to terrify me. But in the dream, no one is watching. No guards, no cameras. Just people walking home in the snow, breathing. And somewhere in that quiet city, I'm walking too. No phone, no lens, no captions. Just a man learning to see again. The story was never about freedom. It was about learning who you become when no one is watching.